Hi, welcome to Exodus, Exegesis, Ask Me Anything. I'm Brian Russell. It's great to have you back in class. Again, thank you for the opportunity to serve as your professor this semester. I appreciate the good work everyone's doing. And I want to talk a little bit about the Sabbath. The Sabbath is, again, depending on the order that we go with the Ten Commandments, and make sure that you look at the notes on 28 to 11, because then you can see that there's three different ways of numbering the Ten Commandments. So, for example, in the Jewish tradition, this is the fourth commandment. In the Roman Catholic, Lutheran, Augustine, this is the third commandment. And then the Orthodox, Reform, Anglican, this is also the fourth commandment. Again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, look at the very first page of the notes on 28 to 11 so you can see the different ways that the Ten Commandments are numbered. The Sabbath commandment is a critical one, and I'm going to say a few things about it, but I also wanted to give a couple of reminders. We're now in Module 7. Hopefully you've turned in either work on Exodus 19 or on the Sabbath commandment. If you haven't, Exodus 21, 1 to 11 is due Saturday the 21st. Exodus 32, 7 to 14, the 28th, and then Exodus 40, 34 to 38 will be due the first Saturday in May. It's the 4th or the 5th. Again, looking forward to receiving those. Again, you need to turn in two papers for Module 7, and then we'll have the final book review, which is one critique of the two textbooks, Exodus and Revolution by Michael Walzer, and The God Who Makes Himself Known, our other text. And you want to compare those. You can read the instructions on that, but what I'm looking for is not a summary of both books. You're going to do a very brief summary of both. Most importantly, I want to see analysis, strengths and weaknesses of the books, especially around the issue of their hermeneutical approach to the book of Exodus. What are the strengths, limitations of the way that the two authors approach reading the scriptures, and what can we learn from that? That's what that paper is. Then you have a final exegetical paper that will be due. That is you can redo one of the Module 7 papers that you work on. If you want to work on a different passage other than one of those 5, it's okay. Just make sure you clear it with me, and do note that we doubled the word count for those. So I do expect to see substantial improvement and more depth than what you're able to do on a Mod 7 paper if, in fact, you actually repeat one of the papers that you already did. Again, we have a few questions that came in about the Sabbath, but I want to walk through it and show you a few things. One of the things I'm looking for as I grade the papers is this: are you aware of the key exegetical questions that come out of a close reading of the passage? And what do I mean by that? Well, I want to look at the Hebrew text and show you a couple of pieces. I'm going to share my screen with you. And what you'll see is this is going to be the accordance software. And we'll be able to see the Hebrew text. And then I also went ahead and brought up the ESV translation, so in case you're not able to read along with Hebrew. But I wanted to make a few observations. Now, it's also important to recognize that there's a second version of the Ten Commandments in Deuteronomy 5. They're essentially the same commandments with a couple of differences. And you want to be aware of that. One of the differences is in the first word. Deuteronomy uses shamor, which is keep, over against Exodus is remember. But do note this word, remember. This is the initial positive commandment that we have in the Ten Commandments, and this is an adverbial infinitive. Here it's functioning as an imperative essentially, but we do have a exegetically significant syntactical observation. Instead of having imperatives that we've seen thus far in the Ten Commandments, we have the positive command as an adverbial infinitive. So remember the Sabbath day. And this last word, again, you can see what ESV does. It says to keep it holy. But there's a couple of other options. And this is an exegetical question that turns on how you understand the function of the infinitive that's here. This is an infinitive. In the Arnold Choi book, this would be called an infinitive construct. And this is a common feature. We have the preposition lamed on it. Then we have the verbal root from kadosh, which is to be holy. The PL, to make holy. and we have a suffix on it that's referring back to the Sabbath to make it holy. So that the question ends up being, what's the force of this? And if you look up in the Arnold Choi book, you can see that there's different options for how to translate a lamed on an infinitive construct. The ESV just simply has it, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Perhaps there's purpose there or results. We have to ask ourselves, is this a purpose? Is it in order to keep it holy? So that keep it holy. It can also be remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, which then would focus more on the mode or the means by which we keep the Sabbath holy. Those are the kind of things you want to look at when you're doing your exegetical work, because those slight differences in meaning are important theologically and exegetically. Then it goes on, 6 days you shall labor. And you'll do all your work. So one of the significant pieces about keeping Sabbath is this whole issue of not working or doing all your work on 6 days. Now, this is a rhythm that comes into play. This goes all the way back, and as we go through the text, you can see down in verse 11 that the Sabbath commandment is substantiated. It's grounded. The rationale for it is that the Lord did all his work on 6 days. He made the heavens and the earth and the sea, and God rested on the Sabbath. So God's the model for this. So this goes all the way back to creation. This is a critical piece. The Sabbath command is this bridge command that connects the love for God, the first couple of commandments, with the love for neighbor, and ultimately a love for creation itself. And so the Sabbath is this bridge, and it's rooted in Genesis 1. And so this becomes the model for many of Israel's ethical dimensions. So it's going to be as we go on and look at the book of the covenant in chapters 21 through 23, we have laws about crop rotation. The slavery command that's due in Exodus 21 has a feature where a male slave is released on the 7th year. So the Sabbath is a principle that God embeds into creation itself, with the idea that you do your work on 6 days. On the 7th day, you do no work. Now, the radical nature of this is, first of all, what's work? And I think we've talked some about this in our forums, but at principle, here's the way I like to think about it. It's refraining from any work that brings you economic gain. And this is a kind of a first world problem. In the ancient world, everybody was a subsistent farmer. And so there was an issue there. Now we can essentially have great periods of leisure, but we can choose to work. And so you want to refrain from economic gain. And notice the risk here. This is about acting on faith. We think it's tough. Oh my gosh, I don't need to work for one day. In the ancient world, imagine if you're harvesting crops. You take a break. That's a risky move, right? You imagine all your neighbors are working if you're a Jewish peasant farmer, and but you're going to take a break. This is a witness. It's an act of faith. It's an act of witness, and it's a literal refraining from labor, refraining from the things that you do for a living. Again, to go back to the text itself, 6 days you'll work, you'll serve, all your labor you'll do. But on the 7th day is a Sabbath to Yahweh, a Sabbath to the Lord. And who's the Lord? Your God. It's not just his God, her God, my God, our God. It's the Lord, your God, singular, my God, not just y'all's God. This is a singular command that it's a community, because we're going to see that Sabbath is for the whole community. But notice that the initial calling, it's each person, each individual Israelite responds to the call for Sabbath. But then, this is the cool part, it extends that. You're not going to do any work, you, your son, your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, your livestock, or the sojourners within your gates. So the Sabbath isn't just for individuals, it's for the community, and it's not even just for the community of faith. God extends Sabbath not simply to this community of the circumcised males and all the women that are attached to them. This is extended beyond the community, so it's a creation affirming. So even animals get a day off, from Fluffy the poodle to Shrek's donkey. I'm just checking to make sure you're still listening to it. But all the different animals, the cows, the goats, the donkeys, everything that the Israelites had. And also servants who may not have been Israelites, and even the resident alien who's living amongst them. The Sabbath commandment is for the whole community. So this is important because one of the things we have to reflect on is how do you live out a communal commitment to Sabbath today? Because many of us just take a personal Sabbath, but this text doesn't have anything to do with that, because if it was a personal Sabbath, what you could have done is you take your Sabbath on the Sabbath day, let your servants have Sunday off, give your donkey Monday off, let the resident alien have off Tuesday. But no, this is, you can't take a Sabbath at the expense of someone else. This is a way to reflect on God, because this is good news. Go back to Genesis 1. Notice the rhythms from Genesis 1. God starts with a mess. Then each day, God does the work and it's good. On the sixth day, after God's created humanity and brings creation itself to a climax, God says it's very good. But then what? There's something even better than very good, and that's Sabbath. Then the rhythms of the creation. It's not morning and then evening. It's darkness and then light. Darkness and light. Sunset, sunrise. 6 days of work and rest, not rest and then work. And so notice that all creation is moving towards this rest in which human beings, God's people, serve as God's hands, feet, mouthpieces to creation as a witness. So Sabbath is about a witness. Now, there's a couple of questions that came out. One of the questions that I did receive is why in that long list, and if you go to Deuteronomy 5, the list is even longer of animals, peoples, persons that are excluded or included in protections for Sabbath. And it's often noted that how come the wife isn't mentioned? Well, this is important. Presumably, the reason that the wife isn't mentioned here is because the wife is actually assumed in the commandment itself. Now, we do have an example. If you drop down a little bit farther, where there's lists of similar protections. So like when you get down to the covet command, you will not covet your neighbor's house, covet your neighbor's wife, his male servant, female servant, his ox, donkey, anything at your neighbor's. Now there you do have a woman explicitly included. Presumably though, in verse 11, and most commentators do go along with this, it's the understanding that the commandment would have been inclusive, so it's not mentioned. So this isn't saying that the only person who doesn't get a Sabbath is a woman, the women in the household other than the servants, because you can also say that it has to be implied that the daughter is already mentioned explicitly, and also the female servants. So this is a command to the heads of households, to the husband and the wife. Otherwise, it just doesn't make any sense. Okay, then when we go through here, we have again these extended protections, and then so that would be an exegetical question. Then in 11 is like, why isn't the wife mentioned? So I think we want to ask about that. And then 11 again, we have the reason for the Sabbath that roots it in creation. Now, when we get to Deuteronomy 5, when you read that section of the Sabbath, this is where there's a significant difference. The Sabbath commandment in Deuteronomy 5, the reason for the Sabbath is that God redeemed Israel from Egypt. And so we have the Exodus as the reason for the Sabbath command there. So that's a little bit different. Okay, a couple other things you want to think about. When we reflect on this theologically, we've already mentioned Exodus or Sabbath as a faith commitment. We've talked about the risk of that. We've often also talked about it as a missional commitment, where we reflect something about who God is by refraining from work. And that's critical in today, where it seems like people are either are working more and more and more to compete globally and just to keep our jobs locally. Whereas this Sabbath is essentially saying, halt. There's something bigger than work, and that's the Lord. Now, there's a reverse piece. Another problem that we have, and it depends on the times, is the issue of unemployment. Again, coming out of the Great Recession almost 10 years ago now, there was a great deal of unemployment. Now, unemployment figures have been getting better in the United States, but still worldwide, global unemployment is a hard thing. And so you want to reflect on what does it mean to actually keep Sabbath if you're unemployed and you wished you can work. So we want to think about that. Anyway, those are a couple of comments. Now, what I want to talk to you about just for a minute, and I put quite a bit of information up in the course center, so make sure you read through those documents. In fact, some of those documents actually really got very personal, because I am radically committed to helping each one of us live as the person that God created us to be. And I know that for me, Sabbath is a critical piece there, because that's God tells me to stop. I have a natural inclination, or maybe it's a learned one. You can read my essay and see some of that. And I tend to overwork, take on huge amount of work, and enjoy work possibly way too much. Sabbath calls us, though, to find that rest in the Lord, to recognize our enoughness. I like to say, I'm enough, I have enough, I do enough. God's enough for me, I'm enough for God. Sabbath at some level speaks that to us. And my concern to you in this class, and I notice a lot of students these days, we try to fit seminary into an already loaded schedule. And that puts us and I've done the same thing by taking on too much work, where you get the option of, like, what am I not going to do? Right? Which of the multiple things that I'm tasked to do today do I have to skip because there's just simply not enough hours in the day? Take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. Jesus gives us this gift of the Sabbath, and take care, though, because a lot of times we'll quote in the New Testament. You can see some of my reflections in the note that Jesus said that Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And that often gets used as an excuse then that we're free then to do good on the Sabbath. But if we're going to be clergy persons or Bible teachers, pastors, ministers, missionaries, counselors, there's always going to be work to do on the Sabbath. Jesus was making a point about what the kingdom was like, but that doesn't have to transfer us. God isn't calling us to ultimately run ourselves into the ground. So if you find yourself in this place right now, even at this point in the semester, you're literally completely overwhelmed, I'd be happy to talk with you. But more importantly, I want you to know you don't have to live like this, and you want to get things under control now. Otherwise, these will become habits that you'll just continually cycle through, and you'll experience more and more burnout as you go through life. And that's not what God calls us to be. Jesus came to give us life, to give it to us abundantly, and Sabbath is one of those gifts that God gives to us about the abundant life. And so take a look at some of those documents that I put in there where I talk about Sabbath and trying to get at what really drives us, what prevents us, what hinders us from keeping Sabbath. I also wanted to talk about or answer a couple of the questions. The first question was about the issue of why isn't the wife mentioned in 10? And again, I answered that in the context of walking through the passage. The other question that we want to look at is what are your thoughts on the implications, if there are any, of keeping the Sabbath for creation care? Can this passage serve as a foundation for a theology of creation care, or would we be taking this passage out of context if we do? This is a fine question, and the answer is no. This is the Sabbath commandment is part of a theology of creation care, and it's not stretching it at all, as I kind of hinted at in my exegetical comments. By rooting it in Genesis 1's creation account, we have that, and then we can also see how the Exodus and other texts extend Sabbath in ways for creation care. So, for example, in Exodus 23, 10 through 13, for 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield, but on the seventh day you shall let it rest and lie fallow, so that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave the wild animals may eat. You shall do the same with your vineyard and with your olive orchard. 6 days you shall do your work, but on the seventh day you shall rest, so that your ox, your donkey may have relief, and your homeborn slave and resident alien may be refreshed. Be attentive to all that I have said to you. Do not invoke the names of other gods. Do not let them be heard on your lips. And so there's a key text that, again, deals with creation care, because that's what it is. You're resting the crops. Again, in modern science, they know that it helps crops to rotate and rest them, so it just returns the nutrients. But notice the concern, it isn't so much that you'll have more crops, but it's specifically left it's creation care, in the sense that by leaving the fields untended for a year, you're actually providing what? Food for the poor. But it's also interesting there that it's food for the animals. So God shows that care for the animals, which are part of creation. So yeah, it's completely appropriate to see to start to think about a theology of creation care out of the Sabbath. Again, I'll continue to do these Ask Me Anythings. Send me in your questions, and I'll answer them for you. If you want to jump online, I'll be here. I look forward to receiving your work. And until then, until next time, live by faith, be known by love, be a voice of hope to others, learn to keep Sabbath, embrace it, allow God's abundance to flow into your life. So then the gospel, as it flows into us, refreshes us, it can then flow out to the world as we seek to be his hands, his feet, his mouthpieces. And I'm Brian Russell. Thank you for listening.